Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello.
This is what the fake news misses. We've taken control of Iran's airspace and waterways without boots on the ground. We control their fate. But when a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality.
That was Secretary of Defense. I know he wants to be referred to as the Secretary of War, and I guess now we know why. Talk about telegraphing. But anyway, that was Pete Hegseth from this past Thursday reacting to press coverage of the war in Iran. And yes, it is a war, not a military action like the Trump administration is trying to claim. That way they can avoid having to go to Congress for permission under the constitutional provisions. As it is, Republicans in Congress are already giving them cover to avoid that. Now back to Hegseth. What's his problem with the news media coverage of the war in Iran? It's how having the deaths of our military troops be the top story is making Donald Trump look bad. That's what Hegseth was referring to when he said tragic things. Listen again.
This is what the fake news misses. We've taken control of Iran's airspace and waterways without boots on the ground. We control their fate. But when a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality.
I heard it. You heard it. But Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, says, no, you didn't hear that. Here's Leavitt later on in the day this past Thursday.
Given what Secretary Hegseth said this morning, is it the position of this administration that the press should not prominently cover the deaths of U.S. service members?
No, it's the position of this administration that the press in this room and the press across the country should accurately report on the success of Operation Epic Fury and the damage it is doing to the rogue Iranian regime that has threatened the lives of every single American in this room. If the Iranian regime had their choice, they would kill every single person in this room. And so we can all be very grateful that we have an administration and that we have men and women in our armed forces who are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the rest of us in this room and for every American across the country and for every troop that is based in the Middle East. That's what these...
Secretary Hegseth was complaining that it was front page news about these 6 service members who were killed.
That's not what the Secretary said, Caitlin, and that's not what the Secretary meant, and you know it. You know you are being disingenuous. There is not... We've never had a Secretary of Defense who cares more.
Drones get through or tragic things happen. It's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad.
Yeah,
as you know, we cover the deaths of U.S. service members under every president.
The press does only want to make the president look bad. That's a fact. Especially you. No, listen to me. Especially you and especially CNN. And the Secretary of Defense cares deeply about our war fighters and our men and women in uniform. He travels all across this country to meet with them, to connect with them, and your network has hardly ever probably reported on that. You also had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Chairman Kane, who's a brave patriot, standing alongside the Secretary at the Pentagon this morning, again expressing his condolences to these families. And I just told you that the President of the United States will be attending their dignified transfer. So please,
that's not making the president look bad. That's showcasing that.
We expect you to cover that as you should. We expect you to cover that as you should, Caitlin. But you and your network know that you take every single thing this administration says and tries to use it to make the president look bad.
Now, there's something I need to point out regarding what you just heard. Did you catch when Leavitt was referring to courage? She said the administration before recognizing the courage of our troops. That's something that's also happening at the Pentagon press briefings with Hegseth and, it's usually General Kane. Hegseth refers to Trump, the administration first, and the troops last. Then when it's General Kane's time to talk, the first thing out of his mouth is recognition of our military troops. Two important things have become crystal clear about Pete Hegseth. First, he's being told what to do and what to say. Evidence for that is how he's literally reading word for word from a script at the press briefings, while General Kane simply refers to a fact sheet and speaks more from the heart. And second, Hegseth has left zero question where the priority of his service rests, with Donald Trump. It's the only reason why someone as unqualified, both intellectually as well as emotionally, could wind up in the seat that Pete Hegseth currently occupies. In a relatively short amount of time regarding the war in Iran, the discussions have already turned to what the U.S. will demand for military actions to come to an end. Donald Trump has said that nothing other than an unconditional surrender by Iran will be acceptable. So that's created a rising concern about this requiring boots on the ground, with, of course, the assumption being that those boots would be American soldiers. Our first guest today is here to help us better understand there's another path to take for this part of the battle, which would actually increase the pressure on the Iranian government. He's Chief Intelligence Officer with Artorias, which is a threat intelligence geopolitical risk company. He also hosts Bluff, which is the Artorias podcast. Stefano Ritondale, how are you today, sir?
I am doing well, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for helping us, and I always strive to bring people to look ahead to what's coming up as opposed to just rehash what is happening, and I think that's the contribution you can make here. Artorias.com is the website where you can learn more about the work of Stefano's company. But just as a foundation, because this is what I think is confusing a lot of people, civilian-wise especially, you think you're going to do something and you set a goal of why you're doing it, the reason why you're doing it, and that seems to be missing from what we've heard so far. It's literally been a daily assortment of we're doing it for this, we're doing it for another reason. Strategically, if you don't have a focused, agreed-upon goal, isn't that putting the mission at risk?
You know, that's a phenomenal question. And how I would address that is, you know, I would agree that the messaging from not only this administration, but I guess from our political leadership as a whole, I mean, we could just look at Congress, it's kind of all over the place. But what I would tell people is sometimes this is where you kind of need to look at the data to try to get away from the noise. And what the data showed even before this latest round of strikes occurred was that the U.S. military deployment to the region was the largest we've seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And even before the strikes were happening, it was pretty clear that if the president decided to do regime change as his end goal, this were the military assets he would need in place to execute such an operation. And since then, in looking at all the strikes that we're seeing, one of the key tenets and components of this is effectively to lead regime change. I mean, Israel has led a lot of the operations to decapitate the Islamic Republic and their political leadership. We saw that with the killing of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. We're continuing to see that with additional strikes targeting the political leadership. And I think it's pretty clear that that's the interesting aspect that the United States is doing. And then this additional conversation about utilizing the Kurds, the Iranian Kurds, to do ground offensives clearly indicates that regime change is the goal. Now, how that looks later on, that's the key question. But right now, militarily, and what we're seeing from all the reporting is regime change right now is the primary responsibility of the United States and Israel.
And if it were to succeed, it would certainly go against the vast bulk of history. I'm trying to think back that the closest you could say to an American-led regime change might have been Panama. But I'm stressed to try to think of another one.
You know, I think the Panama is a phenomenal example. The one that's also kind of interesting in a way from a historical context is I think you would actually look at, for example, the Falkland Wars or even Serbia, which was basically how those both of their countries, because of the end of the war, eventually led to regime change. And I think between Panama and that, you can kind of find this middle ground. And I think that's really the design of the United States and Israel. Unlike the 2003 invasion of Iraq, where we had boots on the ground leading this, I think what the United States and Israel are trying to do is basically cause multiple crises, existential crises for the Islamic Republic that prevents them from addressing it, and then they just succumb to it, and then a regime change happens. And it's just different components and different pieces of the puzzle that then enable kind of this crumbling of the Islamic Republic from within. So you've seen, for example, the targeted strikes against the political and military leadership, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that have led to thousands of members of those organizations to be killed. Obviously, before even the war started, there was the severe economic crisis where even the Iranian rial, their currency, was worthless. You're seeing now the possibility of the Kurds kind of getting involved and maybe launching some offensives near the borders to try to chip away the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. And I think the goal is also then, we've seen the administration also highlight two things. One, encouraging defections. We've seen President Trump specifically mention that a lot within the Islamic Republic. And then two, to even see if we could get protesters out in the streets. And I think the goal is, how much existential crisis can we cause right now on Iran that at some point is just too much and the Islamic Republic just is overthrown on itself. And those historical examples, you might find a good middle ground between all them. I think that's the angle they're trying to pursue with this right now inside of Iran.
Mentioning the resistance, and we certainly have seen, and this isn't the first time, but this is the strongest support that an in-country resistance has received from America, and maybe even indirectly Israel. But from reports I hear, it's sort of every person for themselves. There isn't it's an unorganized resistance. How much is an organized resistance needed for Kurdish ground troops to accomplish anything, to move this whole thing forward to a conclusion?
That's an interesting question, because the Iranian Kurds are various groups. I think it's very important to highlight that when we're talking about the Iranian Kurdish groups, there are various groups, right? You can look at for example, the PJAK being one of them, right? The PAK, the Kamala, right? Those are just three. So generally, these are various groups that have a long history of fighting the Islamic Republic already. These groups have been fighting for years and years and years, and they have a history specifically in the mountainous border regions of Iran and Iraq, in those Kurdish regions. And they have a long history of targeting the Islamic Republic. So they do have kind of this experience in this guerrilla warfare insurgency, which is what they're accustomed to. Obviously, this is a different ballgame in and of itself. And if we're going to use history, we said in the past as an example, what I think this is kind of looking like is what we did in Afghanistan after 9/11, right, in October 2001 with the Northern Alliance, where there was a ground component of the Northern Alliance supported by, the U.S. Air Force, in this case it would be U.S. Air Force and Israeli Air Force, really enabling them to push on the ground with certain elements of U.S. Special Forces supporting them on the ground. So if the goal is, and the question obviously remains, how much of an offensive and how far do they want the Iranian Kurds to push? I don't think it's really feasible for them to go all the way, let's say, to the capital of Tehran. That's a huge ask for them, specifically for a Kurdish minority group. But you could be looking at other regions and other cities in that immediate vicinity, such as Tabriz. And Tabriz is a major Iranian city. That is something that's much more capable. Can you see a scenario where these groups are pushing in to seize Tabriz, more than likely with some elements of U.S. Special Forces providing that support and that link with the Air Force to conduct strikes? And we're already seeing the first indications of Israeli airstrikes in that specific area of northwest Iran, potentially supporting a future offensive of this magnitude. Some of the strikes that Israel has done are specifically enabling a future offensive on the ground. And what I'm looking for is to see if that kind of continues, because right now it is. So it indicates an offensive might be sooner than most people anticipate or realize.
So there are signs that, and the Kurds have actually formed, it's called the Coalition of Political Forces of Iranian Kurdistan. So the Kurds
Correct.
have formed a coalition where, at least at this point, the people in the streets have yet to either have a leader rise or a dominant force rise within their ranks. But from what you're seeing, is it safe to assume that America and or Israel is already coordinating with the Kurds?
I think that's a safe assumption to make. And to be honest, I mean, some of the reporting out of the Kurdistan region is pretty difficult. Obviously, it's very isolated and remote. But it could be even that sort of some of these offensive operations have already started in some areas, right? To your point about the protesters, what I would say is I think we have to be very cognizant of your listeners that last month is when the major protests erupted in Iran. And actually, that was the catalyst for this later round of war. And that's when we really saw the buildup of a military buildup from President Trump, was that the response, the massacre that the Islamic Republic did on Iranian protesters who went out in the streets. And some of the figures, President Trump has said 32,000 protesters were killed in basically a weekend, right? And so I think that also shows that inside of Iran, even prior to this military war, there was significant discontent. And the Islamic Republic is very concerned about it, and they took extreme measures to try to squash it. And so I think that's why before this latest military round started, we already saw some small protesters start to pick up again, anti-regime protests inside of Iran, specifically because Iran is a Shia Islamic country. After the killing, they generally have 40 days of mourning. And so that 40 days of mourning kind of elapsed right before the strikes happened. So we started to see smaller protests start to begin. Obviously, now we've kind of seen them mostly halt, although there's still some videos out there of Iranian protesters on the street. I think once the United States is really able with Israel to pick off a lot of these targets and the Kurdish element, I think there's going to be an incentivization by the United States and Israel through other means, let's say, information warfare, for example, to try to see if they can get the protesters out. And there is this brewing discontent inside of Iran that has really challenged the Islamic Republic. And I think that's what the Trump administration specifically is really looking for, to see if they can go back out of the street after really significantly degrading Iran's internal regime stability apparatus.
Of course, certainly right now in the president trying to do any technical communication to form a coordinated resistance is tough because there's no internet, no TV, and very little of any radio going on. So communication to the masses is certainly challenging, to say the least. But for you listening, if you're thinking of warfare as a bunch of lines coming out of a center point, what Stefano is describing is how a bunch of lines going into a center point, a goal, a direction, is what is, and possibly sooner than many people are imagining, could lead to a significant change in how we see Iran being governed. And, of course, the mystery is out there, too. The Kurds obviously want the Iranian government to go away. Do they want sovereignty, or do they want a role in what's to come? That'll be interesting to watch as well. Learn more about Artorias, which is Stefano's company that he is serving as Chief Intelligence Officer, Artorias.com. And check out Bluff, which is the Artorias podcast. Stefano Ritondale, thanks so much for the education, the insight into what's happening out there. It happens fast, but when low knowledge can bring about a great understanding. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're listening via your favorite podcast platform, make sure you follow and subscribe so you never miss a minute. When you hand over personal information to your financial company, your bank, even the Motor Vehicle Commission, you do so with the expectation that the information will be used for a specific purpose and only for that specific purpose. While the U.S. Constitution assigns the election process to the individual states to oversee, federal government of Department of Justice is seeking access to state voter rolls, which includes the information you gave access to for, like I said, a specific reason. My next guest is here to explain the concerns this move by the DOJ creates and why you should really care about it. He's Director of Democracy with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, Erik Cruz Morales. How are you today, Erik?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for bringing this to people's attention, because it sounds superficial, like one of those things like, well, it's already there and I have nothing to hide, so what's the big deal? LWVNJ.org is the website for the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. So describe what's going on with the DOJ, because it's not just in New Jersey. I even mentioned a couple of weeks ago that this is one case of several states that the DOJ is looking to get access to voter rolls. What's their mission? What's their purpose on this?
Yeah. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because, this is happening right here in New Jersey. And like you mentioned, this is happening across 29 states that the federal government is demanding access to states' full voter file, including very highly sensitive personal information like birth dates, home addresses, driver's licenses, and partial Social Security numbers, right? And so they are asking for all of this information on the basis that they want to check that elections in those states are not being tampered with. But we know that that's not been the case, and there's been very little evidence of that happening across many states. And so they are arguing that, they need to investigate states' voter roll information to ensure that states are complying with federal election laws and to prevent voter fraud. But we know that, like I mentioned, there's been research and there's been study after study that has debunked those claims where, undocumented people are voting at these elections. And so what they're asking for is very sensitive personal data, like I mentioned. And we don't know what they're gonna use that information for right now. I mean, we have some sense of what they might to go after newer naturalized voters, and that's essentially what we're thinking of. And that's not up to them. It's federal overreach, and elections have been left up to the states to decide that information, to decide that process. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, just as a basic foundation, we have the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. It's called the Election Clause for a reason. It empowers the states to regulate and oversee elections, and that includes voter registration. This is a state's right that the 10th Amendment says the federal government can't put their hands on, but yet they are. And that seems to be the confusing part, because you can think, I'm thinking hypothetically, you can have someone who got married and didn't do all the name changes they should have done, a gender identification change, didn't do all the changes they should have done innocently, that could get caught up in this and wind up with a lot of legal explaining and legal costs to have to deal with.
Yeah, agreed. And you know, for me, I think, you know, this is going after new Americans, newer naturalized citizens, to see that, you know, that who are going to be impacted primarily for this, just because at one point the folks that, you know, were going through, that are now naturalized, had a different sort of status in while their time here in the U.S. And so there might be outdated databases that the federal government might have access through USCIS or through other federal agency that might, you know, say that those people are voting and might be creating trouble for them. And so it's the impact that this is going to have. It's going to be pretty big on a lot of people, especially newer citizens in this country. And like I mentioned, you know, study after study has shown that it is very, very rare to have cases of non-citizen voting, right? Brennan Center study from 2016 surveyed 42 jurisdictions that cover around 23 million votes and only found 30 cases of suspected non-citizen voting. That's 0.001% of all votes for that population. And even the Heritage Foundation's own voter fraud base built to specifically document election crimes contains only 68 total cases of non-citizen voting going back to the 1980s. And so, you know, we know that this is for political reasons. We know that the midterm elections are coming up, and that this administration has made it an effort to begin to impact the outcome of that through legislation as well in Congress, through the SAVE Act, right, and make it more difficult for people to participate in our democracy. And so, you know, this is happening here in New Jersey, and we at the league decided to file a motion to intervene as part of this case, because we know that it's federal overreach, and the federal government should not be having access to this information, because they're not being clear with what they need this information for, and they don't need it, and they don't have the right to have it in the first place.
And with the courts setting a precedent already on this, there have been 3 federal district courts that have dismissed DOJ's attempts against California, Oregon, and Michigan, courts saying the government had not demonstrated sufficient legal authority under the cited statutes. They're actually trying to do this under the guise of the Civil Rights Act of 1960, trying to make it sound like they're trying to protect the vote. But as you're describing, Eric, they're doing the exact opposite. They're attacking the vote.
Yeah, they're attacking people, and what they're doing is going to have a big impact would have a big impact on citizens, on naturalized citizens particularly, and people like you mentioned that might have like their information changed through name change or any other process that require them to change their information. And so this is just impacting our democratic process, and it is going to be it's going to have a negative impact, particularly in states that have big immigrant populations of newer Americans in this country. And so we are fighting back against this, and like I mentioned, there are other 29 states involved that have been requested to hand over this information, and even some of these more conservative states disagree with this effort by the administration, because it's not up to them to have authority on elections at all.
Although it's important to know, too, of those 29 states, the vast majority are what we would call blue, or at the very least purple states. It seems like the red states, the DOJ doesn't see an issue.
Yeah. So this recently, the other 4 states that were brought on here to this lawsuit that are being requested this information include Utah, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And so, there's opposition in those states as well, and it just there's no clear evidence of the claims that they're making for requesting this information. And so, here in New Jersey, where we're going to fight back at the league, our work is to protect our democracy, to strengthen it, improve access to the ballot for communities, and empower voters. And so, these has political motivations behind it. There's no clear evidence of the claims that they're making, and so we're here to fight back on this.
The case, by the way, if you're listening, it's U.S. v. Caldwell. If you want to look it up in whatever legal database you want to use, maybe and I have the doc and the actual filing too. Maybe I'll put this up on our downloads page on our website for you to review and get a better idea of what is happening. Why, we don't know, because while the DOJ has said, and even this is a violation of the Elections Clause, they want to develop a nationwide database of voting, which the federal government has no constitutional right to do that. But then, again, the question becomes, as the three courts have said already, okay, that's what you want to do. Why do you want to do it? So with California, Oregon, Michigan already defeating this attempt, do you have high hopes that the actions being taken here in New Jersey can join that list of three states and help people and help the DOJ realize you don't go fishing with people's private information?
Yeah, that's what we hope, right? I think that's what we hope from our governor and our elected officials who are in this position, the Secretary of State, to push back against this information and to work with other states to push back against this. There've been I think there was a letter signed by a dozen Secretary of States that warn about this massive federal voting database that is likely to, misidentify eligible voters and show, decreased participation in that, especially with elections coming up this year. And so we're hoping that, the state, the Attorney General's office, continue to fight back and work with other states to push back against this effort, because, this is happening. This is one way that it's happening, but, they're really pushing hard through Congress to try to get the SAVE Act and, pass the House, where it makes it very difficult for people to participate in our democracy by requiring ID at the polls and going through a very more difficult process that requires now to have proof of citizenship through your birth certificate or your passport, which many people don't have access to for various reasons, right? Oftentimes a passport costs money. Some people lose their birth certificates, and it takes time to find it and gather those documents, especially, when people are working, they're doing many other things. And so this is just a pattern that we're seeing from this current administration to decrease participation in communities and for people to lose power and to not have a say on what's happening. And so it's very harmful to our democracy. And, we really encourage for states to push back and fight back against what's happening, because they are in a position to do that right now. And strong leadership is what's needed at the moment from electeds.
And it's also happening. It's all happening in red states too. We just saw in Texas. We have to wrap up here, but with the primary elections, they changed voting locations because the GOP in Texas is starting to get fearful that Texas might be leaning more purple than it is red. So there's various games that can be played by those who are in power, and it's up to the people who have the true power to push back and make sure that we do have fair, legitimate elections, and your personal data is used as it is constitutionally being allowed to use under the Elections Clause. We'll put the document up for the legal action, U.S. v. Caldwell, on our downloads page. Find out more about the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, lwvnj.org. He's the Director of Democracy, Erik Cruz Morales. Erik, thanks so much for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Have you looked at the price of gas at the station you go to lately? Well, if you did, how much more was it today than it was yesterday? Maybe you're one of those who thought that since we are an oil-producing nation, that the war in Iran wouldn't hit American energy prices. Well, here we are, like it or not. And while we're not seeing lines at gas stations, could we see a growing line of people considering, or maybe reconsidering, hybrid or electric vehicles? Joining us to explore this option and the points best for you to focus on is automotive analyst with CarEdge, Justin Fischer. How are you today, Justin?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here to talk about this. CarEdge.com is the website, and we do have that link at our homepage. Learn more about this and all things vehicle, no matter what your choice or preference is. Give us a state of the EV hybrid market right now, because we all know that late last year the tax credit went away. Did that greatly impact sales and what's available right now before we get into what's available?
Yeah, before the EV tax credit at the federal level ended on September 30th of 2025, EV sales were doing great before that point, reaching a high of 10.5% of all new vehicle sales in America. But by December, that had been cut in half, down to about 5 to 6% of new vehicle sales. So EVs are in a bit of a slump because there was such a rush of buyers before the federal tax credit ended. Anyone who was considering buying a fully electric vehicle probably did it before that deadline in order to take advantage of the credit. So that's bad news for the dealers and automakers, but good news for anyone who is considering an EV today, because that makes them more negotiable as they're slow selling in early 2026. Hybrids, however, are more popular than ever. Hybrids never really had a slump, especially models from Toyota and Honda, which are known as the most reliable hybrid vehicles. They continue to sell really quickly. And, of course, they offer that balance of improved fuel economy, improved efficiency without having to worry about charging.
Remember back in January, Donald Trump made the claim about $1.85 gallon of gas in, I think he said, Ohio. And I was Iowa. And I did some digging. That was for what's called flex fuel. Is that the fuel for hybrid cars, or is that a whole nother generation of vehicles?
No, flex fuel is largely ethanol, so not surprising it was in Iowa, since that's a major corn-growing state. But most vehicles cannot take E85 fuel that is 85% ethanol. Hybrids take just the regular gasoline you buy at any gas station, regular unleaded. Nothing special there. But we do see that gas prices are up about 40 cents already over the past month on average across the nation. That's a quick jump for just 4 weeks. And who knows how much higher it could go with oil prices hitting, I believe, $87 a barrel today.
And probably approaching 90 as we go through the weekend. And I think out in the West Coast, California, Southern California specifically, if it hasn't already, $5 a gallon gas is once again the numbers on those signs.
Yep, and that's going to continue to reverse the trend we had been seeing in EV sales. And we fully expect to see EVs become a bit more popular again as anyone who happens to be in the market for a new or used vehicle starts to consider fuel costs as a part of their total cost of ownership again. I mean, the last time we were all really thinking about fuel costs was back in 2022. So for some of us, that's a distant memory, but for others, we remember how expensive that got.
Well, let's look at the math of the matter, too, because we know, by and large, people like to hold on to vehicles. I mean, I've had uncles and family members who, they were those every year, got to get a new one, whether it was a lease or an ownership. But more and more, because of the reliability of vehicles, speaking my own behalf, I've killed vehicles by running them 300,000 miles plus. So I was fortunate, I guess, or I just knew how to take care of the basics, so the catastrophic didn't happen. But be that as it may, if someone is thinking about an electric vehicle, how important is it to think long-term as opposed to short-term as far as costs and savings?
The only time we recommend ever purchasing a new electric vehicle is if you're confident you're going to keep that car for more than 5 to 7 years because of depreciation. Depreciation is very steep on EVs because the technology is constantly improving. Keep in mind the traditional internal combustion engine, that has been perfected over, well over 100 years. EVs are new. They're getting better every year. So depreciation hits hard. For most, it makes more sense to either lease a new EV or buy used. You can find great used EV deals for well under $25,000 these days. Just keep in mind that depreciation is a hidden cost of vehicle ownership for sure. Now, For those who drive more than the average American driver, we're talking more than 14,000 miles a year, you're going to be saving more and more by switching to an EV. And this is also true for hybrid vehicles, because the more you drive, the more quickly your fuel savings add up. So if you only drive, let's say, 5,000 to 10,000 miles a year, you don't take many road trips, going and spending more for a fully electric vehicle probably doesn't make sense for you. You're not going to make up that difference with fuel costs very quickly. But if you drive a lot, you might see those savings add up in just a few years.
With that depreciation factor, is that as prevalent with hybrids, or do hybrids hold on to a value a little bit longer?
They definitely hold on to their value longer, especially models from Toyota. Toyota perfected the hybrid powertrain game before anyone else did. The Toyota Prius actually debuted in 1999. Crazy to think. And they've been improving it ever since. And these days, I mean, the Camry is 100% hybrid. The new 2026 RAV4, one of the best-selling vehicles in America, is now hybrid standard. So they definitely do not lose value like EVs do.
Talking with Justin Fischer, Automotive Analyst with CarEdge, CarEdge.com, their website, and you are listening to Issues and Ideas. I know that over, not more so recent years, but along the timeline of EVs, a lot of people arched the back because it was like, well, I can't get the distance I need on a charge, and if I run out of juice, where can I charge? The boss doesn't like me plugging into the side of the office building. We've seen public charging station networks really increase over recent years, though, haven't we?
Yes, and now, no matter what EV you buy, the vast majority have access to Tesla's supercharger network, which previously that was Tesla's unique factor that really helped them increase sales, is that if you bought a Tesla, you could charge just about anywhere with their network. Well, now, legacy automakers from Chevy to Ford, Toyota, and others, they all have agreements with Tesla, and now they are able to charge their vehicles there as well. You've also got networks like the IONNA charging network that is rapidly increasing across the nation. It's funded by 7 different legacy automakers. They saw how important the need for charging was in order to sell the cars that they're investing billions of dollars in, so they decided to just funnel money into one joint effort called IONNA. And the early reviews are that they're really, really reliable chargers and very convenient, accessible locations, and the pricing for the electricity is pretty affordable too.
I'm glad you mentioned before about leasing and the aftermarket for EVs, because vast majority of the time people hear talk about EVs, it's always buying and owning outright. As far as the leases are concerned, cost-wise for a lease of an EV versus a combustible engine car, are they pretty much parallel?
No, you can get much better deals on an EV lease in 2026, especially since demand slowed following the end of the federal incentives for EVs. We see lease deals well under $250 a month with under $5,000 down. Sometimes even better than that. It's not unheard of to see zero down lease deals for fully electric vehicles. That's a pretty crazy offer, and we definitely recommend anyone who needs a commuter car around town for the least amount of money possible just to get to and from work, consider EV leases. That might be your best bet.
As far as the used EV market, are dealers really hoping those used vehicles turn over fast? Because as you say, much like with anything electronic, if you think of home electronics, for example, or computers, you get something in your home and a month later it's already superseded by something else that just came out. The dealers don't want to be sitting on these used EV vehicles. So, again, are the prices better than consumers might be thinking?
Yes, that is true, but the way we see it play out in reality is that whenever someone is trading in their electric vehicle, they're going to get a wide range of offers from the dealer. So we always recommend shopping around at least 3 dealerships if you're trading in. You'd be shocked at the wide differences in the offers that you're getting. And make sure you don't take the first offer. They should be able to come up on that first offer.
And certainly for help and guidance, that's why we have you and everyone at CarEdge, because you provide the education and the direction that people can go in fully armed in awareness and knowing what they got so they don't get taken for a ride by any dealership. So points to you guys for how you help empower the consumer, which is always a good thing, especially when it's something that you're really not too sure about and you want to have the knowledge. CarEdge.com, that's where you can go. We've been joined by their automotive analyst, Justin Fischer. Justin, thanks for helping us be better aware, and maybe for a lot of people listening right now, maybe find a way to ease the pain of the pump. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much.
The next No Kings rallies will be taking place Saturday, March 28th, happening most likely where you are. You can find out locations at nokings.org. Parents with a child on the autism spectrum face numerous challenges in their effort just to provide a positive life for their child. Those challenges are certainly magnified for military families. Best for an autistic child, we've talked about this often here on Issues and Ideas, is routine, repetition. Military life, no, that does not always provide that, all right? Next guests join us with first-hand experience of how these greater challenges brought about by military life can be responded to in ways that are best for the child as well as for the family as a whole. They share their insight in the book, The Mission at Home, Navigating Military Assignments, TRICARE Education Benefits in Everyday Life with Your Child on the Autism Spectrum. Retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Jamie Parent and his wife, Tracy. How are you today, guys?
Very good.
You're doing great. Thank you, Chris.
And, well, first of all, the website, because you will want to visit it, especially if they are addressing something that you are in need of more information about. themissionathome.com is the website for their book. Tracy, talk about Brian and the first determinations of what you were going to be facing, what Brian was going to be facing as life would move forward with autism.
Well, I have to tell you, it was very difficult back then. Brian is 39 years old. What we had to face was people not understanding. I had a lot of people tell me that my child's a brat, that I'm a bad parent, that if we just, would put him in his place, that he would be able to do better. So that was hard with the outset. That's why a lot of disability awareness is really important. The next thing that was hard was finding those services that were out there. I will say that parent groups were number one for me. Once we found parent groups and other people that were going through the same thing, they were the ones that had the best resources, knew what was going on, knew where to move, what schools were best, and maybe what doctors we should go to. So you face a lot of unknowns, uncertainties. You kind of are always on hyper alert because you're worried about behaviors or what people think outside your home. But I will say that as we've moved forward and as the military's moved forward, there's been a lot of pluses, a lot of things they have put into place.
Let's talk about Jamie, because from the military side, you certainly more directly, although obviously Tracy is a military wife, but as I said in the introduction, stability is not always one of the qualities or characteristics of military life. So when you first realized what lied ahead as a family and with what Brian was dealing with, what were some of your first thoughts?
Well, in 1988, when Brian was first diagnosed, I got to be honest with you, Chris, my first thought was my career is over. My life, as the way I expected it to be, is over. My family's life, all of us in the family, this is a major change that you just don't see coming. And you also have to remember, back in 1988, there's no vaccine information, there's no Jenny McCarthy, there's no Rain Man movies. So we're really operating in a kind of a world of a blank sheet of paper. That's why Tracy's emphasized how important the family groups are, the support groups, because we didn't have anything else. And so if the world doesn't understand autism very well in 1988, certainly the United States military and Department of Defense is going to have to play some catch-up, because they didn't understand it either. Back in the day, it was a program that was run by the medical folks, and now it's run by the line folks. But part of the reason we wrote this book is because we wanted to emphasize to folks that, yes, you can have a military career. Yes, the military does support families with autism as well as other disabilities in the family as well. And so we were back in the day, we just didn't have any information, and we had to work with a framework that was much more structured than we were anticipating.
So Jamie and Tracy Parent, their book is The Mission at Home, Navigating Military Assignments, TRICARE Education Benefits in Everyday Life with Your Child on the Autism Spectrum, themissionathome.com, their website, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. And for Tracy, first I want to say to the person listening, this is not a firsthand, full-heart experience and period end of discussion. Jamie and Tracy share guidance through their experience so you can have a more positive experience and maybe more streamlined than the exploration that they had to do when it came to the well-being of Brian. And I want to congratulate you, Tracy and Jamie, because you bring a better understanding of navigating what can be very complicated and very logic-resistant, I'll call them, programs, and you help people better understand what they're entitled to and how to achieve it and how to attain it. So great job for you guys with that.
Thank you very much. And, you bring up a very good point that back in our day, there was no internet. There were no resources around. And today there's too many. And there's a lot of confusion. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And any charlatan can come along for desperate parents that are trying their hardest to do the best for their child, and they can take their money, or they can mislead them. So I think our book really helps to guide, as you said, with what are the best practices, what are the best therapies, what can you avoid, and what should you really be looking at. So our book does a good job at having parents not have to go all over the place and come to one resource in order to get their needs met, or their child's needs met, rather, by looking at our book.
And we also have a lot of information about things that are just beyond autism, like, for example, financial planning, setting up trust funds. How do you get benefits such as Medicaid, Medicare, SSI, SSDI? And then we go do a deep dive into a lot of the benefit programs that already exist for families. But getting back to your point earlier, autism is a lifelong, it's a lifelong thing, and it doesn't stop with military service. Our book helps the readers maneuver not only during military careers, but also beyond and even into the retirement years.
That's more to know for you listening, because there's never enough information, especially when we come to discussing autism. And I think, too, Jamie, that parents have they think the immediate of the youth years and autism, but the reality is that eventually, sooner versus later, certainly always feels like, your child is going to age out of, and fill in the blank, whichever program they happen to be in. Your book is helping to help that parent look forward and plan further ahead than the short term, and I think that's a very valuable lesson that a lot of parents need to better understand. So again, a great job on your part by you guys for helping bring proper focus, a long-range focus, as opposed to a day-to-day focus, which I think is very important.
It is very important, because when you're in the middle of it, I will tell you, as the parent, especially a child wanting the same thing every day the same way, you get caught in the day-to-day. And you feel sometimes like you're a hamster on a wheel. So this gives you the chance to look at something that can give you that guidance and know what the next steps are when you're ready for it. So the book you can use with the chapter that you're at that specific time in your life, and then you can move on. But there is a roadmap for you to look forward to as you're dealing with those daily challenges that come along with having a child on the spectrum.
And let's face it, talking about benefits like Social Security and Medicare, these can be really dry subjects. So we made sure that when we put stuff into the book, we also include the human side, the human anecdotes about struggles we had with getting an assignment, or what happened when we first met our military pediatrician. And these are things I think that the readers will be able to resonate with, because they're going through the same kinds of things that we were going so many years ago.
And Jamie, how is Brian today, and what would you hope for his future as his life continues to go forward?
Well, when he was first diagnosed, we were told that it was pretty dismal, and we were asked for what his goals would be, and we said, well, we wanted the goals to be hold a job, balance a checkbook, and drive a car. And the look that we got from the clinicians around the room was kind of a little bit more pity than anything else. I'd like to go back to that time at UCLA, Chris, because Brian's achieved 5-star results in 2 out of those 3. He can balance a checkbook. He's working at Publix supermarkets, which has been a great supporter of Special Olympics. And no, he's not driving a car, but you know what? We'll take those 2 out of 3 any day. Brian's doing very, very well, and he's got a very full life, including friends, Special Olympics, the pride that he takes in his job. But there's still some gaps, and it's an ever-evolving process. But Brian is doing great, and thank you for asking.
And there's always hope, too. And for Tracy, just to close out, talk to that parent right now, military or not, that is in those early days and is looking for, okay, what am I supposed to do?
Yes, I think that it's very important to understand. Number one, it does get better. You start to learn things. I think that you have to just be the parent that loves your child. You're looking out trying to get services, but the best thing is to offer a very safe home and to make sure that you're getting your child to have the most therapy they need, but to have a balanced life, because that they're still a part of your family. They're part of that nucleus, and so I think that we used to get worried too much, and I also want these parents to understand that they have to take care of themselves too.
Again, the book is The Mission at Home, Navigating Military Assignments, Tri-Care, Education Benefits, and Everyday Life with Your Child on the Autism Spectrum. The website, themissionathome.com. Jamie and Tracy Parent, no one's obligated to make their life an open book, but what you've done is just that will benefit so many others. And thank you for doing that, for being here today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
We really appreciate it. Thank you.
The following is an email received by an organization called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. Came from an active member of the U.S. military. This morning, our commander opened up the combat readiness status briefing, urging us not to be afraid as to what is happening with our combat operations in Iran right now. He urged us to tell our troops that this was all, quote, all part of God's divine plan, and he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation, referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. He said that, quote, President Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to earth. The author of that email also noted that they were writing on behalf of 15 other unit members. Now, last check, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation has received over 200 calls from more than 50 military installations across all the services since last Saturday, reporting similar teachings from their commanders. It's important to note, too, that the Military Religious Freedom Foundation fully supports the practice of all faiths in the military service, and not one of those organizations that tries to limit or even eliminate religious freedom. So where to begin addressing what these very misguided commanding officers are telling the troops? How about this? Let's start with the term Armageddon. The actual word or name, Armageddon, is only mentioned one time in the Bible. It's found in Revelation chapter 16, verse 16. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. So as you can see, these commanding officers are already wrong by referring to Armageddon as an event, when the Bible actually reveals it to be a location. The actual name of the location, by the way, translated from Hebrew, is the Mount of Megiddo, which many historic battles have taken place. Now, there are a couple of problems with what these commanding officers and zealots are telling their troops about Trump lighting the fire to bring about Armageddon. First, and you may have heard, or I don't know, maybe read about this, is that before Armageddon takes place, something else will. The rapture. Reading from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. We're also told this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Now, as I said, there are two major problems what these commanding officers are proclaiming. They're skipping over the rapture. That was one. The other, which you just might have caught passing mention of in the New Testament, the tribulation. Jesus gives us this warning in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Now, while there is a long time theological debate that's been going on about whether the rapture happens before or after the tribulation, it's important to note, if you go through Revelation chapters 4 through 18, which detail what will take place during the 7-year tribulation, the church isn't mentioned in those chapters. And since the faithful are the body of the church, can that lead to any other conclusion other than the faithful will be raptured before the tribulation? Getting back to the commanding officers spewing false teachings and twisting God's word, to claim that an action taken on purpose can bring any of this about is without question going against the word and the will of God. Let's turn to Mark chapter 13, verse 32. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. The Bible does not have just a message for these zealots, but a warning for them, and no, it is not good. We find this in Revelation chapter 22, verses 18 and 19. For I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book, if anyone adds to these things, God will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. If anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part from the book of life, from the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. Be sure to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. You'll find more information about the guest who joined us here on the show today. And if you're listening to us via your favorite podcast platform, be sure to subscribe or follow us so you never miss a minute. Always thankful, grateful for your time, your attention. Very important, special to us. Look forward to being with you right here this time next week for our next edition of Issues and Ideas.